Hi everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk. Oh my gosh, this is so many people. Um, yeah, so I'm just going to start with a disclaimer that this is a tech talk about my necklace, so I'm just going to talk for 30 minutes about my necklace. And I can do that because there is a ton of tech involved in this necklace and it's responding to people around me. So yeah, you can see I have a lot of electronics currently strapped to my body. So I have this choker with a camera attached, and the camera is attached to a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus. And the Raspberry Pi is running Node.js, and it's running Tensorflow JS, and with Tensorflow JS, it's running an image recognition model. The machine learning model on the Pi determines how many people it sees, and it sends that information to an Arduino. And the Arduino is controlling the lights on this necklace. And it updates these colors and patterns of LEDs based on parameters I've set for how it should respond. Like Paul said, I am not a hardware hacker for work. I am a web developer, so I mainly do React, HTML, CSS, and accessibility. I work on Microsoft To Do, which if you want to organize your day, it's a great app, or if you want to use it like me and make lists of weird German words and a few names for future pets, you can use that too. And I go by she, her pronouns. Okay. Yeah, I'm really fascinated with making myself uncomfortable in public. So a few years ago, I started making lighted clothing because I just thought they were really beautiful. But that's also a burden for me because I love them, but it's kind of hard to deal with sometimes, all the attention that they draw. But I've tried to learn how to channel that from anxiety into more like fascination and excitement, and also try to use them to confront my discomfort of drawing attention to myself. And I just want to start off by showing you some of the projects I started with. So the first project I ever made was this fiber optic dress. I made this a few years ago because I was going to a festival and I thought this is what you were supposed to do. And I basically, this link is a link to the kit I bought. It's actually a fiber optic rave whip. So it's like a flashlight with like 200 strands of fiber optics attached, and I guess you sling it around or something. I don't know. But I copied an Instructables tutorial. I bought this kit. It has just like this flashlight with preset programs. So I didn't code any, I didn't solder any, and my mom kindly made this dress for me, and I sewed these 200 strands to the dress and made this really cool looking jellyfish dress. And people really loved it. I got a lot of compliments. I felt extremely awkward. It was the first time wearing anything glit, and I wasn't used to all the attention, but it was a positive attention, so it gave me a self-esteem boost, which was like the trade-off. I wish it could have been more alive though, because I set a program and that was it. There was no like interactivity aspect to it. So last year, I made this project, which I called, with Paul helped me name this project, it's called Hallit Couture. And so it's just multiple coordinated pieces. And I gave several versions of a talk about this. So that's a link to my talk at JSConf EU last year. So I have these multiple pieces. They're all coordinated together. There's an app using React that you could control the lights with. Anyone on the web could change the colors and the patterns. It was a lot of coding. I had a web app built in React, and then I had a Node.js server. It was using MQTT messaging protocol to relay information, and each piece had an Arduino in it. And it was a ton of soldering. I soldered each of these pieces. Sometimes I had to rebuild and had to do it multiple times because that's how it is with hardware. Yeah, so with this project, I purposely wanted to explore creating this temporary experience that connected a viewer directly to the artwork for a brief period. So to kind of blur the lines between who's the artist and who's the viewer. And I wanted to explore the reactions of people when they realized that the lights could be changed with a web app, that they had complete control over my outfit. And it was an interesting experiment, but what I realized that I was doing it more to please other people, which is okay, but it was less of the direction that I wanted to go in. I wanted to be more focused on me and what I was experiencing. The last project I built last year was this speech-to-image necklace. I know there's no sound, but I have basically the caption, I'm saying I like turtles, and then it's showing the meme, if you know, of like the kid dressed as a zombie, and he says in it, I like turtles. So, so this is the last project I made. So it's meant to show accompanying images as I talk, in hopes that people would find me interesting and stay engaged speaking to me. So it has a Raspberry Pi with a touchscreen just plugged in it. So the Raspberry Pi is just behind the touchscreen there. And on that Pi, I have a Node.js server that sends, and it has a microphone, and it sends audio to the Google Speech Recognition API, and then it sends those keywords to the Google Search API, which I have a custom image search criteria set up. So then it would show an image correlated to what I'm saying. So I like that it was responsive to the environment, but because I was using these APIs, I still needed Wi-Fi. So that I kind of wanted to get rid of like the Wi-Fi dependency on future projects. And a side note, I didn't realize I was really working with machine learning on this. And this is relevant because I'm going to talk a lot about machine learning. So I just wanted to point out that, ironically, I didn't realize I was working with machine learning. I just, until I really looked back at my project, I know that's a bit naive, but I also feel like machine learning is so pervasive, you just sometimes feel like you're using APIs, but you're actually using machine learning. Because I just thought I was sending data and getting a response. So my current project. So I wanted to take the things I liked about other projects and go in this different direction. I wanted it to be responsive to people around me, but it increases my discomfort unless I can conform to social norms. So what that means is very obnoxious and flashy and attention getting when I'm alone, when I'm off by myself. And it only calms down and eventually turns off when I'm sociable and surround myself with other people. So it's less about purposely attracting people. It's more about me wanting to get rid of the lights as fast as possible. And I think I might have convinced you that with this progression of that my progression of work through my projects was a convincing reason for me to build this necklace, but I've misled you a bit. There was actually like a really pivotal moment that I decided to build this. So like I said, I work at Microsoft To Do in Berlin, and I started this job almost a year ago. And I was at this first time working at a really big tech company, and I was very insecure because I don't come from a computer science background, and everyone else had like masters and been doing computer science since they were like 12 years old. And folks started a machine learning study group, so we were doing a big online MOOC course. And I was falling behind from the first study group session, and I felt really insecure about that. But I wanted to prove, mainly to myself, that I could learn all these concepts but do it in my own style. And for me, that meant I really needed to build something physical, like have a physical use case that was relevant to me and my interests. And so the real reason I built this project is because I couldn't keep up with the machine learning course at work. So there was a couple courses that worked for me. The first one is this Machine Learning for Artists course by Gene Kogan. He's really influential, creative machine learning artist, and he teaches at NYU, but he puts all his coursework online for free. And so watching the videos for the course, it really opened my eyes to what artists and non-traditional technologists are doing, like playing Tetris with your face. And it really inspired me and gave me a lot of ideas on how I could integrate machine learning into a new project. And then because I'm a JavaScript developer, of course, like I wanted to do everything in JavaScript, which in hindsight was kind of awful because it would have been a lot easier just to use Python because there was already stuff in TensorFlow for Python was already pretty well documented for the Pi, but I don't like to make things easy for myself. If you're not familiar with TensorFlow, it's a library for training and running machine learning models, mainly in the browser, but you can also run it in Node. And this is Dan Schiffman from the Coding Train, and this is honestly how I learned to use TensorFlow.js. His videos are great. And he just basically kind of plays around with TensorFlow, and that's how I learned. So when I started this project, I knew I wanted to use JavaScript to do the machine learning, but there was two things I wasn't sure of. First of all, I needed to run the machine learning models in Node because I would be running on a Pi and not in the browser. And then I also needed to run these models in Node on the Pi. And the model I wanted to use was this model called Tiny YOLO, and YOLO stands for you only look once, and it's called Tiny because it's one of the fastest image recognition libraries for the browser in TensorFlow. But yeah, it's for the browser. It wasn't set up for Node, so the first thing I wanted to do is see if I could get this model running just in Node. So to do that, I luckily just had to do some minor code changes. I just forked the repo for this project, and then I needed to use the TensorFlow Node specific package, and then store all the models. They were originally in the cloud. I had to store them locally, changing like import, export statements to require statements, things that you do for Node. And I couldn't use like the web camera media devices API. I needed to actually load the file in Node and then send it to the model. So I was able to do those things. You can see I was so happy I sent out a tweet about this. And yeah, you can see it thinks it sees ties, which I'm not sure why, but it also saw people, which was in the photo that I was sending it. So I got that done. That was pretty exciting. But I needed to actually it didn't matter if I got it running if I couldn't get TensorFlow.js running on Pi. And I didn't do too much research into this beforehand, but I got pretty lucky that the TensorFlow.js team was actually making TensorFlow.js like the same week I started working on this. They had a branch that they made the architecture for the Pi, which is a ARM architecture. They were making changes, and they were going to allow it to be ran there. So it wasn't released yet, but with some help from a colleague at work, I was able to just clone it and like use this package called Yalk to link it to my project, and I could build a TensorFlow.js on the Pi, and it worked. And I think this was like probably one of the first instances of actually building on the Pi, because it was like right after they added it into TensorFlow, so that was kind of cool. I was doing something like really bleeding edge. And I have a disclaimer that I haven't touched this since I did this. So it's running on TensorFlow.js 0.14.2. To give you context, the latest release is 1.2.8, and they're also prepping release candidate 2. But you know what? I did this months ago. It's for my project. It works like really, I looked down to make sure it's still working. It works really reliably, and if it's not broken, why fix it? Like, I have other things I can pour hours into, so yeah, so just disclaimer if you want to try this yourself, I'm using an older version of TensorFlow.js. So yeah, my two biggest hurdles were done. So I could start working on the LED necklace. And as a maker, I tend to just buy in bulk, and I always see cool things that I like, and I buy things a lot, and I have a huge drawer of just like extra things. So a while back, I bought this kit. It's like an intro soldering kit called Blinky Tiles. It's these just shapes that you can solder together, and it comes with this pre-programmed, it's meant to be used with this pre-programmed microcontroller that comes with it. But I really like the aesthetic of it, and I actually had played around before with just using their microcontroller to try to use something that you're supposed to create and set on your desk into a wearable itself. So I had made this before. this got completely destroyed when I moved to Berlin, so I just took it apart. But I didn't want to use their preset controller, so I feel like you're going to hear me say, luckily, someone had did this, but this is kind of like how it goes with making. Luckily, someone had controlled these Blinky Tiles before with a different Arduino, and it's basically using, if you're familiar with like stage lighting and stuff, it's called DMX lighting, but they had used this library called DMX Simple, and I could just kind of see the code that they had written for their Arduino, so I was just able to kind of know what microcontrollers they used. And they used a TTT board, so I just bought that exact board, and this is just like my test of making sure that I could control it with my own Arduino, and it worked. And then I just set out on designing what I wanted to make. And you can see like the design on the left is not what I went with. I went with the one on the right. And to make this, I have a mannequin, and I solder on the mannequin. I just pin things out and cut wires, and it's super tedious, but I just do it on my mannequin. So I created the LED necklace, but then I needed to send that image data from the Pi to the Arduino to control the lights. And I didn't want to rely on Bluetooth or anything that could go wrong. So I just decided I wanted to hardwire it. And for that, I was going to use serial ports. I had never sent any messages between devices with serial ports, but on the Pi, there's 2 pins. There's one for sending and receiving. And then I could send the data from the Pi on that data pin to the Arduino. So it seemed pretty straightforward. But I struggled a lot, so I had a lot of problems just getting the serial on the Pi to work. So I had trouble if you see on the left, I just have a wire going into the send pin to the receive, and this is called a loopback. So it's how you can test that your serial port is working. And I spent like a week and had like desperate tweets, like trying to figure out what was going on. And because, it's like the Pi is supposed to be super kid friendly, but I had a lot of problems with this. And I basically I had to change, disable a bunch of stuff, configuration on startup. And I wrote this huge gist so I would potentially remember how to do this next time. But yeah, I basically had to disable stuff on startup every time. So it has the pins active. So things were not going, I figured out things, but things still weren't going great. I had some problems that I needed to deal with before I could move further with connecting the two. So as you can see, that is bad. It's not supposed to be flickering like this. And at the time, yeah, I'm not an electronics expert. I had a hunch it was power issues, but it really was outside of my abilities at the time. So I just switched boards with another board I had, and I switched from the Teensy to an Arduino called the Adafruit Mini Metro. And I got lucky that this board actually worked with that DMX Simple library, because it only works with a few, but sometimes you don't learn things until after, and that's okay. I got really lucky. But I also think it was a power issue where the Teensy board is runs on 3.3 volts, but is 5 volt tolerant, but the Mini Metro has a 5 volt output, and the Blinky Tiles need 5 volts, so it just happened that it matched up better. But really it was because I had one lying around and I got really, really lucky. So I fixed the power issues, but then I had another problem. When I was running the machine learning model, after about 30 minutes, this is HTOP to monitor things, the memory would fill up, and then the swap memory would fill up, which is really bad, and then it would crash because it had a memory leak. And I combed my program looking for memory leaks, and I was just stumped. I could just see there was a Node app called app.js running. Well, do you remember this project? I was using the same SD card and Raspberry Pi, and it turns out this project had a memory leak. It was running at startup I had it running with PM2 on boot. And yeah, it turns out this one had a memory leak, but because they were both called app.js, it was kind of hard to debug. Yeah, so I figured out that, and I turned off the other Node.js app that was running, and then it was okay. Yeah, so I got those bugs fixed up, so then I could get back to actually sending this data from the Pi to the lights. And then I had another decision to make. So what format would I use to send data from the Pi to the lights? And as a JavaScript developer, I'm like, hey, I just use JSON every year. I'll just use JSON here. And yeah, JSON on Arduino is a thing. There's a library, and it worked. But in retrospect, this was a really bad decision because Arduinos are tiny. They're very limited in resources, memory-wise. And the lights would pause while it was processing and parsing the JSON it received. And I thought I was so clever for using JSON on an Arduino, but it was just a really bad decision on my part. So I had to redo this. And this is code from my Node.js app. So I switched to, I had to think about what really the Arduino needed. I didn't need an object with information about all the things that the camera was seeing. I just needed really to know how many people it was seeing. So to do that, I only really needed a byte. I needed a number. So I condensed it down, and I'm just sending 3 bytes now to the Arduino. So I have just a starting and end byte, just so on the Arduino it knows when because over serial it just gets a lot of garbage, and so it knows these bytes is getting an incoming message. And then the one in the middle is just the number of people. And the tiny YOLO model only can categorize up to 20 things. So I knew that a byte would be sufficient for that. So finally I could send information, and then it was time to work on programming the lights. And this is just a lot of non-JavaScript, C++-ish Arduino stuff. And thankfully, Charlie showed a little bit of Arduino code, so you can see there was a setup, and then there's a loop. And inside this loop, I have some methods that are checking when it's receiving, you can know if it's receiving a message and things. And this is, I just want to show a snippet of code. So this is some code I wrote that when it knows it's receiving a message, then it can call this set program method. And basically, I wanted to show that when there's no one around, I have this, it's really chaotic. And then as the people, it sees more people, then it goes to more gentle light program. And then eventually, it goes to dark mode when there's 6 people. And if you're interested in looking at Arduino code, this is the link for that. I'll also have the links to my project at the end if you don't catch it in time. And so I had it sending things, but then I had another problem, because this is how hardware goes. So I had just been testing it on my mannequin, but then when I actually put it on myself, it was having some fit issues. So as I moved, it was flashing because some of the wires were shorting out. And I originally envisioned putting all the tech in just a fanny pack, not realizing how big a Pi and a battery pack and everything was. So it was no way that it was going to fit and look cool in a fanny pack. So I had to resolder some things. So after I stopped crying about that, I just resoldered, and that was fine. And then I decided to just kind of strap everything to my body on this girdle. And this actually works quite well and solves the problem of too much stuff. And then I decided to add one more feature that I hadn't really planned for. So sometimes I get really overwhelmed wearing this, and I just want a way to turn it off completely and give myself a break without having to be around people. So I added this button ring. So I have 2 things I can do with the button ring. The first is I can flip the light programs. So it's actually when I'm around no one, it's off, and then as more people come around, it gets more chaotic, so it just completely flips them. If I do the short button, and then it can come back on. And then when I just get completely exhausted by everything, I can do a long button press, and I can just completely turn it off, but then I can turn it back on. Just to like, it's kind of like my escape hatch if I just can't rip this off of me and I just want it not to draw attention. And that's it. This project was hard and I got demotivated a lot. I originally envisioned doing this in 3 months and it took me 8 months. Not because I was working on it constantly, but because I took like some month-long breaks because some of these problems, like the messaging and the power issues and things, like really wore me down. And of course, there's always stuff I could have done differently, but I'm really happy with what I've learned, and I'm excited to continue doing machine learning things with wearables and other projects. And I love to talk about non-tech stuff, dogs, fashion, all outfits of the day, any of those things. But we can talk about tech too. Just if you're around and you want to say hi, I know I can look unfriendly sometimes, but I'm actually friendly. I'm just nervous most of the time. So say hi. And that's it. Thank you so much.